Kopfstand, der Podcast für PR, Kommunikation und neue Arbeit.
Hello everyone and welcome to yet another English episode of our podcast Kopfstand. Our topic today is getting creative for clients. And there is no one to know that better than our two American guests in this episode. To my left, we've got Kathy from Phoenix, Arizona, and to my right, we've got Kevin from New York City. Both of them lead Alltold, what could be described as Allison+Partners creative thingy, I'd say. So, Kathy, as you're the head of Alltold, could you please explain what you're doing?
Sure, although I like your description. So Alltold is our creative integrated offering for the agency, and basically it brings together our research teams, our analytics, the creative piece, which we'll talk about, content strategies, and digital strategies. And it's really how we tell stories for our clients across a lot of different channels and mediums.
All right, so from a creative and content perspective, how is it different to the classical PR work we do?
Well, I think what we've been trying to focus on is more about taking the strength of our PR legacy, which is in storytelling, and then create more of a strategic way of executing that and expressing that in shareable, memorable, creative campaigns. So in a lot of ways, we employ some of the same kind of rigor around the kind of message we want to communicate in a way that motivates people to do something or think a certain way or think differently. But how we execute it is really focused on making sure that the work that we do generates and focuses a feeling. We think that when people feel something and they're feeling connected to a brand or a message, they're more likely to connect with that message and more likely to behave in the way that actually has really strong business impact for our clients.
All right, so after this first little dive into the service portfolio of Alltold, Kathy, could you tell us more about yourself? So how long have you been at Alltold, respectively, Allison+Partners, and what did you do before?
Sure. So I started my career in-house on the brand side. I did a lot of different positions in the hospitality industry with Hilton and some other big brands. Did a lot of work in the technology side with Motorola and other startups, and then eventually found my way to Allison+Partners, which actually was 9 years ago. So I just hit my 9-year anniversary. At the time, I was building an office, and the market was changing dramatically in terms of how people viewed media, how people consumed media, and we started to see significant shifts in content marketing and the need for new services, and that's when we launched Alltold, which was about 4 years ago to the day.
All right, and your big field, so to say, is research and measurement. So what do we do in that field that might be interesting for potential clients?
Well, I just think there's so much more research and data points available now than ever before. And of course, that can get really overwhelming. There's so much data that sometimes it's analysis paralysis. You can look at everything so much that you ignore some of your creative instinct and gut. However, what the insights do allow us to do is really find those pain points or those ways to emotionally and rationally resonate with an audience that can be then turned into a creative execution. So from that standpoint, I think one of the biggest advantages that we have is the amount of tools and resources that we're implementing against learning more about our customers, getting better insights, and then being able to direct the creative strategy around that.
So could you say it is boring figures made exciting?
I don't think my research team would find it boring. They love it. But there is definitely a lot of data, and there's a lot of analysis that can go into it. But again, it really has to be balanced with, the way people act is with their hearts and their minds. And so when you get these insights, it's then about, well, what is that story? What's going to resonate with them? How do you tell it in a way that's actually going to grab their attention when there's so many messages that they're dealing with on a daily basis? But no, for me, the research is actually the starting point. It's the way to anchor in the creative idea before you land on an execution.
And as you said, as it is the starting point for a lot of companies, we try to figure out how many companies in Germany and Europe use these kind of measurement tools and research tools in order to base their creative campaigns on that, and how these companies do that we will hear in our segment called Überschlag.
Überschlag, der Faktencheck.
What kind of background work goes into a creative project? A successful campaign starts with a clearly defined target group. Marketing managers draw information from a variety of sources. For example, classical market research through surveys and observations can provide valuable insights. In addition, companies make use of data from CRM systems and social media profiles. Multipliers such as journalists and active forum users are also monitored for the planning. In order to define the best angle for a campaign, including the definition of objectives, strategy and tactics, a SWOT analysis can be very valuable. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats of a company are summarized in a matrix, providing a good overview of important internal and external factors. The success of a project can then be measured with the help of ROI, which means return on investment, one of the most important key figures in marketing. How exactly this is calculated depends on the goals that have been set. Some of the goals might be increasing brand awareness, promoting lead generation or increasing sales numbers.
Überschlag, der Faktencheck.
So we're back with Kathy and Kevin, and now we're talking more about the content and the creative side. And what I would like to start with is visual content. So Kevin, if you could describe what's the most important thing about visual content, what would it be?
Well, I think, ultimately, if you look at where culture is today, we're much more responsive to visual stimulus. So if you look at how social has evolved and how experiences have to really entice and seduce to some degree our customers to make sure that they can see within our storytelling something that relates to them, an emphasis on being able to grab them visually in an environment where their thumbs are scanning through their phones very quickly is incredibly important. And I think that should allow people to think that any business, any industry, any brand has the opportunity to be visually driven in their content. It's not something that is just for a consumer brand or a tech brand, but it can be for a B2B technology software brand. So something that is an opportunity for people to start reorienting themselves to be visual and content rich and first, so that it's less focused on the old way of doing things, which you have to kind of create more of a rational argument, like let's make a visual and emotional one.
But you would also say that visual, although it is a vital part of a creative campaign, it is also just a part and not the only thing you should consider when you're doing a creative campaign.
I think the most important thing is for it to feel real. So I think when Kathy was talking about research as a spark into the creative process, for me, I look at that as getting closer to whatever the truth is that we're trying to communicate. So to me, it's more important for it to be relevant to the moment of the moment and important for the brand when it comes to what they want to be perceived as. So, and a lot of times what we tell clients is that you have to be relentlessly dedicated to the changing culture of people and of your market, of society in general, and that if you care about where we're headed in that way, then that's the starting point. That's the most important point. And then you can get into how best to express that, and then the visual elements start to come in there.
Kathy, if we could just state an example how this would work when you say you have this potential client wanting a campaign or is a need for certain content, you would start with research, right?
Yeah, so it all starts with the business objective at first. So what is the business trying to achieve? Are they trying to get people to behave in a certain way? Are they trying to change their perceptions about an issue? Or are they just trying to become better known? So you start with the business objective, and then from there you move into the target audience. So who are they trying to reach with this message as they're trying to achieve this objective? So there are so many different research tools that we have available. It's been a very significant investment for the agency in terms of being able to pull out these very key audience and industry insights. So what motivates them? How crowded is the space? What is going to cause them, or what is the need in their life that can be answered from this product or service? What's going to change their mind about a specific issue, or what are those perceptions already? And there's a lot of research tools that we have. There's a lot of insights that can be gleaned by how people behave digitally. what sites they see, what media they consume, what their competitive set is doing. So we take all of that and we really look for these compelling insights. So when you boil it down, what are those big aha moments that actually say, this is what, there's a territory or a white space that we can build a content campaign around that addresses this particular need or this particular perception. That insight then is fed into Kevin and his team who start the creative process.
So speaking of boiling it down to emotions, how do you convert figures and numbers into emotions?
I think it is a challenge, and so I'd never want to say that it's easy or that there's a formula that you can just put into place and out comes, this emotionally resonant campaign. But I think if you have the right people and the right focus and the sort of pursuit to identify what is that compelling emotional connection you can make with your audience, then I think that structure allows you to sort of find the human-centric message in any project or in any work. And that can be just as, so when I look at the facts and figures side of things, and then that gets boiled down into sort of this core insight, I see that insight as being the spark for the work. And if it kind of comes back to that insight, then I know the client will be willing to take a risk if they have to. If it seems like work that they haven't done before in the past, or an emotional direction from a concept or creative standpoint that they're not used to doing, I think we can make sure that they feel comfortable because it's strategically sound. And if a client sees the rationale for the creative decisions we've made as strategically important because they've factored in the audience, the market, culture, then I think we could make anything, compelling. And because we've invested in, internal video services, creatives from all walks of life, that we've got a very special team to take a look at that information and really plummet to get the best work out. And a lot of that is engineered, frankly, to not only live on social and in the digital environment, but to be contagious. So we want people to see it, share it, talk about it, be part of it. And it all really starts at, what are you trying to say and why does it matter?
And why it matters is a good point for our next segment coming up, which is the Rückwärtssalto, called backflip in English. So this is where we do a short history on a topic, and this time it will be the video segment. So we were looking at how videos evolved over the last 10 years in Germany and Europe.
Rückwärtssalto, die Geschichte zum Thema.
Video is king. When it comes to online content created by companies, users definitely prefer to watch videos. According to the Future of Content Marketing report by HubSpot, over half of the respondents chose video as preferred online content, whereas only 18% want to read blog posts. Back in 2008, the ARD ZDF online survey showed that only 1/3 of internet users did view videos live or delayed with web TV. Since then, the amount of users that watch videos online at least once a week more than doubled. Mostly they prefer video portals like YouTube, MyVideo or Clipfish. GfK, one of the biggest market research institutes worldwide, shows that YouTube is the most important video on demand provider in the last years. YouTube has got a net reach of about 86 to 91%, whereas Amazon Video, the RRD Media Library and Netflix follow far behind. YouTube started in February 2005. 6 months later, in August 2005, the first YouTube video was uploaded on the platform. Nowadays, there are 400 hours of video material uploaded every minute and 1 billion hours are watched on YouTube every day. Researchers show that until 2020, the internet traffic will be 80% purely video, and there's a good reason for it. A web page with text only has an average dwell time of 48 seconds. If you add a video to it, the visiting time increases to almost 6 minutes.
Rückwärtssalto, die Geschichte zum Thema.
All right, so now back with Kathy and Kevin from the All Told team at Allison+Partners. And from videos, we're now going to switch to a more broader perspective to the overall strategy. So, Kathy, why is it important to add features like digital, like video, like creative content to a PR strategy? Why doesn't it work the way it worked 20 years ago when you only had classical PR as a company?
No, it's a really good question. I mean, I think it's really gets down to how people are influenced today, how they make purchase decisions, and where they get the information from. And so let's take, for example, if you were purchasing an automobile, you wouldn't just read magazines about that. You would talk to family members or friends. You would look at, if you're a mom, for example, you would talk to other moms in your circle, or you would look online for recommendations. Those recommendations, those referrals, those sources of word of mouth really come from all different online and offline channels. We know just basic marketing that the more you're exposed to a message over time and in different formats, the more likely you are to take action. Multi-channel communications, meaning moving beyond just traditional media relations, is important for exactly that reason. People are being influenced differently than they ever have before. They're seeking information and advice of people in different formats than they have before. And these social channels and those digital channels are a primary piece of where they're getting that type of information.
But creating the content and trying to get the right people to see it is the one thing, and really reaching these target groups that should be interested in the products is a whole different story. So how can we make sure that we reach these target groups that we want to reach?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with us being very, very committed to understanding who we're trying to communicate to. So if we understand them in a deep way, where how they consume media and content has been factored in, what times of day they do it, what sources are the most influential for them, we can craft not only a story that's going to resonate with them, but that we're going to be able to execute that story in the right channel at the right moment for them to act upon it. So a lot of it has to do with just being absolutely obsessed with who we're talking to and making sure that the work engages them. And that allows us to be very selective about the types of distribution channels we go after and make it much more efficient for a client. You know, I used to work at an ad agency many years ago, and there were very, very specific, reliable, and traditional advertising channels that you would execute. You would do print ads, you would do television ads, and over time you would do digital ads once that movement became more pervasive. But our position is different. We consider there to be a waste issue. There are opportunities that clients engage with out of tradition, but aren't necessarily delivering a return on investment for them. And so where we go is we only recommend what we think is essential to do.
Now, a personal question for both of you. Kathy, you first. On what criteria do you base your buying decision?
My personal buying decisions? Oh gosh, that's a good question. I definitely look to online sources. I look to influencers depending on what the purchase is. So if I'm looking at clothes or makeup, that's one set of purchase decisions. And I look a lot in the digital space. I see what the trends are, what people are talking about. Certainly if I'm buying something larger, like, electronics, for example, I look a lot more at product reviews and things like that. So a little bit more technical information. So again, I think that really makes the argument of you have to really start with who's the person, what are they buying, or what are you trying to get them to do? And that's how you plan your channel strategy from it.
What about you, Kevin, especially when you're working on a day-to-day basis in that field?
It's funny. If you were to ask my wife, it would be YouTube influencers or Instagram influencers almost exclusively. But I think I factor in that world too, maybe for different reasons. I do think there's a lot of appeal to getting a recommendation from quote-unquote people like you. But I still also rely on what I consider to be sort of the premium experts within the space. So whether that's journalists I admire, or writers I admire, or sort of social icons that share this kind of information. So it's a mixed bag, and I'm motivated in different ways depending on the product or service. And so again, I think that gives us a good environment to sort of say, it's not just the market, it's our everyday lives that are influenced by these types of influencers. And I think taking that seriously, understanding that that is kind of where culture is sort of pushing things, that we make sure that we're in that space, not only in an authentic way, but in a highly strategic, validated, tested way. And I think we can provide clients that level of assurance because we're not just consumers of that space, we're practitioners.
And we were curious, so we went on the street and asked people on what they are basing their buying decisions on. And this you can hear in our segment Purzelbaum.
Purzelbaum, die Umfrage.
I say I do a lot of research online before making a purchase, like seeing kind of what people think like the best brands are, the best products.
I'm a victim of pretty packaging. I love packaging which looks good and which looks good in my room. So there's that.
My purchase decision is extremely dependent on social media. I tend to buy a lot of things that I see that I like. I see influencers that have a certain product that I might or might not like, and seeing them use it obviously makes me want to use it as well.
If I want to buy something, I'm like Googling it and thinking like about what's the best deal I could make.
I think it's mostly me seeing what the people around me like are buying in terms of like food or fashion, let's say. I'll go to them and be like, where'd you get that? How is it? And that's usually how I make most of my decisions.
Purzelbaum, die Umfrage.
So a lot of different opinions on the street, but what we can figure out is that you'd have to work with influencers, with digital or social tools. You can't avoid that as a company. And Kathy, how would you think that will develop in the future? Do you think this will be reduced in the future as you cannot always believe what influencers tell you, or what's your opinion on that?
Right now, I think influencer engagement is still in its infancy. So there's still a lot of different approaches to influencers, frankly, across the globe. So there's different ways to work with influencers. There's different levels of trust that you put into the information that comes from influencers. I think at the end of the day, that authenticity factor is still very important. As Kevin said earlier, you want to buy from or be influenced by people that are quote unquote like you. And you have to place value and credibility in what they're saying. So I think the concern is that as we continue to saturate influencer marketing over time, the credibility of the information that comes from it starts to really be questioned. As more influencers are also entering the market, it's really becoming saturated in some of the segments. It's harder to find the people that are really going to build business outcomes for a brand. And so there's a lot of different complexities. I think price is going to be an issue. I think authenticity is going to be an issue. And at some point, you just have to wonder when consumers are going to say, that's it, I've had enough. And we start to look for the next technology and we start to look for the next platform.
Last question, Kevin. When it comes to authenticity, I think that is one of the hardest part to achieve for a company, because as a consumer, you always know they want to sell something. So how is it possible for a company to stay authentic and trustworthy in times of influencers and all these digital and social impacts?
Yeah, the interesting thing I think is that sometimes brands will try to buy authenticity from an influencer. So they might not have the authenticity on this particular point or conversation, and they're looking for an influencer who does, and they're trying to work with them to deliver that. And so, our big thing is to make sure that our aim is true, that we can be focused on looking at authenticity as the tone that we should be communicating in. It shouldn't be perceived as, hey, we're going to execute the same type of campaign that we would in paid channels and just use these other channels in the same exact way and just sell very hard and focus very much on us as the company or the brand. What we try to recommend to clients is to look at their customer as the hero of the story, and that we as a brand or a company empower and enable them to be great. And so in order for us to sort of get to authenticity, we have to pay attention to our storytelling process. Because if it's just about us as the company and we go down the list of the features and the functions and why we're great, yes, of course, the audience is going to be turned off by that. They're going to see it as inauthentic and they're going to feel like they're being sold to. And you might be doing more damage to your strategy than if you had done nothing at all. And so I think we try to make sure that clients and brands see themselves as part of a bigger culture. And there was this data point that I like that that was said that Unilever isn't competing with Procter & Gamble, that Pepsi isn't competing with Coke. They're competing with culture. And a lot of times culture is more interesting than anything they're doing. And so it's easy to disregard them and just pay attention to what's happening elsewhere. And so it's really, really incumbent on us to not only understand and be attentive to how culture is changing, but then continue to craft stories that we feel will be not only authentic, but the best expression of the brand's vision and DNA.
I want to stick with one thing you said. The customer should be the hero of the story. And so I can say thank you, Kathy and Kevin, for being the heroes of this episode. And all the best for the future, and thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. I had a great time.
Thank you, Kevin.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks.
All right, so if you want to check out all the great work the All Told team is doing and Allison+Partners is doing, you can find the link to the website in the description below. And I want to say thank you for listening into our podcast. Thank you and take care.
Kopfstand, der Podcast für PR, Kommunikation und neue Arbeit.